Hello, have you been here before? Welcome back. If not, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. Inspired by the Dead Meat channel and their series of kill counts, I am doing a kill count for Malevolent Blackstone seasons 1 through 6, created by Harlan Guthrie. If you've seen this intro before, you may skip over to this time code. Malevolent is a horror podcast created, written, directed, edited, voice acted, and scored by Harlan Guthrie, which revolves around Arthur and John, a fragment of the King in Yellow, as they survive horrifying monsters and face eldritch forces. And a lot of people die, so I'm going to be counting these kills. In the same vein of my videos ranking every single episode of Malevolent, go check that out if you so desire, I will be splitting the kill count into 3 videos, one for seasons 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. I have already done kill counts for the Magnus Archives and several books, so check that out if you so desire as well. I'd be very grateful if you did so. Similar to the Magnus Archives kill count, I will be going episode by episode, listing the people killed and giving context, explanations, and critiques about them. Some kills are very explicit, while some are implied or referenced, and generally, I use one special rule. If the kill is used for storytelling, if it's part as sort of like the horror genre, then I will count it. Monsters, bones, and vague mass casualty events will also be counted depending on what is being described and focused on, and of course I'll explain more when I get to those exceptions. So without further ado, please join me as I count all the kills in Malevolent. Alright, seasons 5 and 6. These seasons, specifically season 6, gets a little fudgy with the numbers. This will be a little bit of a longer video compared to the last 2 kill counts because I will be doing a lot of explanations and describing and showing how I'm counting these kills. Alright, so bear with me as I count the kills of seasons 5 and 6. Beginning with Intermezzo, where Cain gives Arthur and John his grand plan about what he wants them to do. He wants them to find the Blackstone. The last time it was found was in an alternate history, London. Before that, we get 2 kills. We get Nyarlathotep himself, who was killed by Cain. I'm counting this one Nyarlathotep as representing all other versions, at least, of Nyarlathotep. I believe that the manager is Arthur's version of Nyarlathotep. I'm not fully sure, but I am counting at least one of them, because Cain says he's killed all of them. We don't know about the manager yet. We know at least one survived, but we don't know how many there are. So I'm going to count just the one. And then when Cain is showing Arthur all other versions of other dimensions, other worlds, we see Eddie being killed by Arthur. So other Eddie, I'm going to say, is killed by Darkther. Cain likes this version of Arthur. It calls him Darkther. So I am also counting this as a killed by Arthur because it's Darkther. Because it's just kind of fun, to be like, yeah, this is also a kill by Arthur. And then after this, Cain sends them to an alternate history, England. Part 41, the windmill. We have Arthur and John trying to find their bearings, trying to find out what's the next steps. They find this windmill and they find a gap in the wall that leads them into the witch's maze. Inside they find human remains. John says, human bones, the maggots are feasting on them beneath our feet. There are chains on the walls. At least one body can be counted by this vague description of human remains that were killed by the witch. In part 42, the prince, we can count Prince Warren of Arabelle, who died in a cart accident. Arthur and John encounter the prince chained up, and he says something about him dying by this cart accident. It's later confirmed his name in part 44, the deliverance, as Warren of Arabelle. And then later, after Arthur and John free him, the zombie prince attacks them, and they also have to kill the zombie prince. And so Arthur eventually does manage to kill the zombie prince. So the prince, titular prince of this episode, does not get any break. He just dies 2 times. Part 43, the witch. Arthur is trying to escape the witch labyrinth, and he is stabbed by the witch. And then she sort of just lays him against a plinth and is talking to John, who is, in Arthur's mind. This is the first time that I can actually say for certain that Arthur Lester is killed by the witch. She stabs him and then puts maggots into his body because she's going to use his body to feed her maggots. which, like, I feel like Arthur should have died a lot earlier. I think he should have died on the boat, brought back to life by the Wraith. I think he should have died in the tunnels in Unconquerable, but he was saved from that by John and Cain. But I think he should have died both times and then brought back to life. So, you can have that sort of unstoppable feeling of Arthur, but whatever. He dies here for the first time, killed by the witch. Then later in that episode, John convinces the witch to help her find her talisman. She pulls out the gun, which he calls a thing from Lang, puts it up to her own face to remember where is it, and John convinces her to shoot herself. I'm going to say the witch was killed by John here, because even though she shoots herself, it's still by manipulation by John. And then John claims himself as the King Yellow and says, "No one can tell me who I am." So I'm going to count the witch killed by John. Also forgot to mention Yorick. Yorick becomes a really important character, but we saw him in 42 the Prince. He's also the Prince, titular the Prince. Dual uses for the names, right? Part 44, Deliverance, no one dies. Yorick does convince Arthur and John to take a hand off of the dead body of the witch, because it can be powerful, and then they escape the tunnels. And part 45, The Fire. Before we get to the important part, I will note that there's a moment where Arthur and John find a river. Arthur tries drinking from the river, and it tastes rancid, it tastes rotten, it tastes like death. And then they find an abandoned village, they set a fire, and a man joins them at the fire named Malum. Malum tells them this story that is very true, and I'll tell you why in a bit, but we can count first a drowned boy, a boy who drowned accidentally. This boy was discovered by a stranger, and the stranger tried saving the boy, but was not able to save him. So the stranger goes to the village, and the village believes the stranger having killed the boy. The village in general kills the stranger. And then, because of weird eldritch stuff happening, Malum is conscripted by the boy, the dead boy, because the Malum is some sort of entity that follows the wishes of dead children. The boy had wished that the person who tried to save him, the stranger, be avenged. And because of that, Malum kills his entire village. But I can only count 4 people killed by Malum, members of the village. We can count the 2 parents of the drowned child, mother and father. I'm going to count the village in general as one other person. And then in the description of Malum's, story, he mentions children specifically. He says, the village became fervent, uncontrollable, to the point where not a soul stood with the stranger. That to me counts just, the one general village, not counting the parents. And then he says, even the children wanted his blood, and so they spilt it to the hilt. Because he specifically notes the children, that's a different body of body of people that I'm going to count. So, parents, village, children of the village. Malum killed 4 people, at least. And I am counting them also because in a future episode, I believe the next episode or something like that, I'm not fully sure, they do encounter the bodies of all the dead villagers. There's no specific description of the piles of the bodies. John just says the bodies and notes that Malum really made the village disappear, killed everyone in the village. There's no further description that might differentiate any specific bodies. And the one village count that I had within that 4 would count enough for general idea of the village. So that's why I'm adding them to the count. Part 46, The Unclean, no one dies in this episode. This is the episode where later, towards the end, Arthur and John find the bodies of the village. Before that, he encounters Horrog, this eldritch nature monster of some sort. I'm not a fan of Horrog at all. It does note that the villagers had killed people to feed to Horrog because they were some sort of cult for Horrog. But because Horrog mentions that the village had killed people, but it's been a long time, that is too far of the past to be like, that's at least 1 person killed, because he's talking about the village who is now dead. So I cannot count anybody here. Part 47, The Hand. As Arthur, John, and Yorick are heading towards Castle Carringford, they encounter this gibbet with a man, and Yorick has Arthur knock down the gibbet to get the eye out of the the body. So that's a corpse with an eye, or specifically the corpse with the eye that becomes the hand of malevolence that I can count, who is gibbeted. Why was he gibbeted? I don't know. How he died? I don't know. He probably died from exposure. But that's definitely a corpse. So that's a body onto the count. I think it's specifically also male. I think he himmed. Part 46, The Castle. Arthur and John find themselves in Castle Carringford, and they encounter a litany of different people. I'm not going to list them now. But one of them does end up dead, Langward Ardeen, which we will learn eventually in Part 49, The Suspects, was killed by Lord Everard. This sets up a murder mystery. We don't know that Lord Everard killed him. Towards the end of the episode, Everard tells a story to Arthur and the other suspects in Castle Carringford about the effects of the Blackstone, the grin of Azathoth. He talks about his own father who touched the Blackstone and had this horrifying grin on his face that would not come away. And because this story is used for horror, I'm going to count Everard's father as dying here because he describes in detail.
And it was the same smile he kept when he brought his hands up to his lower jaw and began to pull. We watched in awe as the meat in his cheeks began to stretch and tear, as the bones in his jaw began to break, as the blood began to pour down his front. We watched as my father, with his other hand across his face holding the upper half of his skull, tore his jaw clean off his head. All the while, smiling. For as long as he could.
So, I'm going to count him there. In Part 49, The Suspects, the body count keeps rising. First, we have Gerard the Vindule, who was killed by Barnabas of Balaki. In this murder mystery, they split up, and Barnabas goes a little crazy, so he kills Gerard. Then he wants to kill Arthur, but ends up killing Friar Horbrook instead, because Friar goes into Arthur's room to hide, and he's stabbed by Barnabas. And Arthur, as he's escaping from Barnabas, he finds Lord Everard, and Lord Everard pushes him into a chasm, huge chasm of like a forest. And this forest is related somehow to, I almost said Nyarlathotep. I'm just really proud that I'm able to say Nyarlathotep that quick. You know what I mean? Shub-Niggurath in some way. I'm still not fully sure how this is connected to Shub-Niggurath, but it's definitely a remnant of Shub-Niggurath after she was erased from the entire existence. This strange forest holds a dark young, which John and Arthur remember having read about in the second episode in Miskatonic University, right? And in this moment, Arthur is able to kill the dark young because we all remember, the voices at least, remember about how to kill the dark young, shoot him in the mouth. And so Arthur is able to kill the dark young. While he's in the forest, after killing the dark young, Lord Everard kills Barnabas of Balakian, pushes his body into the forest, and he's about to kill Arthur as well. So we can count Barnabas as well, was doing a bunch of killing. He was not the murder suspect. He didn't kill Langward, but he definitely killed the other two people. And so that finishes up the murder mystery. Lord Everard sees that Arthur is holding the coin from the three soldiers. Again, I cannot count the three soldiers at any point because we do not see them alive, nor do we hear about their death. But they just show up dead. I don't know. But anyways, he finds the coin. Arthur shows him the coin, and he is convinced that Arthur is working to stop all the bad stuff. He told his story about his father, and he hated how this castle was used for a cult for the Blackstone, the Fallen Star, and so he worked to kill a bunch of people who are cultists, because Langward, who's the other people? Gerard, Friar, and Barnabas all were some sort of practitioners of an eldritch deity, and so he killed all of them. We get mentions of people killed in the past, but no one specific, and even if there was specific people killed, I don't think I would have counted them because they're not relevant to the story. And now Arthur is part of Part 50, The Company, which is a group of people sent to take the Blackstone somewhere. Arthur has to get the Blackstone to Cain, so he's, a step closer to finding the Blackstone. But now he's surrounded by a bunch of different people that are invested in getting the Blackstone to somewhere safe. In this episode, no one dies. They do encounter Mother Darkness that sort of threatens them, but no one dies in this episode specifically. Part 51, The Purpose, we have back and forth between the present of Arthur sitting next to a dying Antoine, who's asleep in the rain. They're in the rain right now. And past moments of important moments happening with other characters. First flashback, we see Sir Roderick Vell being killed by Arthur as a mercy kill. He's actually injured by an attack of some men that attacked them. I believe it's implied that they were sent by either Lilith or Mother Darkness, but I'm going to count Sir Roderick Vell as being killed by Arthur because he's the one who gives the killing blow. It is a mercy kill. It's not like the other kills, but he definitely, that's through his hand. Do you know what I mean? In a different flashback, we can also add Alia Showell to the list because she is killed by Lilith. She is, it's a little dubious here in terms of Lilith put her into eternal sleep, basically a mercy kill as well. And this is confirmed by Lilith as, you know, I gave her a gift or something. And so we're not fully sure if Alia fully died or not. I'm going to say she is because she's in eternal sleep. She's practically dead, and Lilith practically mercy killed her. Part 52, The Wager. Great episode. So a lot happens here, so we're going to take this a little slow, okay? Antoine is dying from a sickness, either through Mother Darkness or Lilith, not fully sure. At the end of the last episode, Lilith appeared, Lilith, whoever, appeared, and they're like, hey, Arthur, you're going to find us the Blackstone. And puts him into a nightmare. At the beginning of this episode, Arthur reasons his way out of the nightmare, but finds himself tricked again by Lilith to find the Blackstone. And he opens up the chest that the Blackstone's supposedly in, and there's nothing there. And so Antoine is like, oh, it's in the castle now, or something like that. And Lilith is like, gotcha. So she jets to the castle. And then Antoine is telling Arthur, like, oh no, there's nothing in the castle. And Arthur's like, what do you mean? And he's like, the castle's gone. Huh? The what? And then he says, oh, Lord Everard is also gone. Oh, hello? What? So I can count Lord Everard, who died in Castle Carringford, off screen. I don't know why. Don't know how. Antoine just says that castle is gone. And because of that, I can also count Rolf. Who is Rolf? Well, in part 50, The Company, Lord Everard gives Arthur a horse and says that Rolf says that this is the best horse he can give him, right? And there are no other servants. There's specifically a moment in The Suspects and 48, The Castle, that Lord Everard does not have any other servants besides Alia. However, Arthur did meet a man whose mouth is sewed closed at the end of 47, The Hand, who led him into the castle. I don't know if that man whose mouth is sewed is Rolf. We don't meet Rolf. So I'm going to say Rolf is the man whose mouth is sewed. He also died with Everard in the castle. Yeah, I don't like that I have to count Lord Everard and Rolf dead because there's no confirmation as to how they died or why. Antoine just says that the castle is gone. So I kind of have to count them because they don't show up later anyways. So, and then the story continues. Lilith is heading towards the castle trying to find the Blackstone, but Arthur is with Antoine, and Antoine is dying from a sickness. He eventually does die, and I'm going to count him killed by Lilith. It is maybe also either Mother Darkness. It's unknown. I do want Lilith to have more kills, so I'm just going to say it is Lilith that kills him because, you know, Arthur is like, you killed Antoine, and then Lilith is like, that wasn't me. I don't know if she's lying. I don't know if it's Mother Darkness. I'm a little selfish, and I just want Lilith to have more kills. So Antoine the Foil dies here by Lilith's poison. And then Arthur discovers that Antoine is all tattooed up, and the Blackstone is inside his chest. Cain shows up, makes Arthur turn on the Hand of Malevolence, freezes Lilith as she's coming back to attack him, and then Cain brings Antoine back to life and is like, hey, Arthur, you need to dig the Blackstone out of his chest. And Arthur's like, I don't want to do that. And there's a moment where, Antoine comes back to life and he sort of like gasps or makes a noise, and then he's killed again by Cain. He was just alive for that one moment, but Cain killed him again. He brought him back to life, killed him again. So that's another death to Antoine the Foil. After Arthur digs out the black stone from Antoine's chest, they have this conversation with Cain about, the black stone and everything that is leading up to this. And Cain is like, do you want to give me the stone or give it to Lilith? And Arthur chooses Lilith. And the Cain is like really angry. He's like, who do you think killed your parents? And we get the revelation that Muriel and Joe Lester, Arthur's parents, were killed by Lilith. Their names were confirmed later in part 60, the final act, Muriel and Joe. But here we get the revelation that Lilith killed Arthur's parents. And then things are starting to, wrap up, and Cain goes up to Lilith, who's frozen by the hand of malevolence, and rips her forehead off of her face, killing Lilith. Eventually she'll come back to life. But in this moment, this version of Lilith, dead. She died. He ripped off her forehead. She's dead. Right after that, I am not counting Yorick being killed. Cain reveals that Yorick was working for him this entire time, led to Arthur making the Hand of Malevolence. He makes Yorick's skull come to him, and he lays him on the floor and crushes him, the skull. Not counting Yorick there, because this is just a vessel for Yorick, so I'm not counting Yorick here. And then finally, Cain reveals to Arthur and John his wager, that he wants to kill Azathoth and replace him to remake reality. And Arthur and John don't want that, obviously, and Cain doesn't want them to stop him, so he kills both of them. Arthur and John are both killed by Cain, and that's how the season ends. We transition into the Capo, the first episode of season 6, where Arthur is walking into his apartment, his office with Parker, and he finds a book. He opens the book. The King Yellow takes over his mind and kills Parker. I'm not counting Parker here because we already saw his dead body. I already counted him. Can't count him twice. And then the fragment of the King in Yellow, who is John, tries to take over Arthur's head and kills him. They appear in the Waylay. Oh my, I didn't even talk about the Waylay. Oh God. The Waylay happened, right? And so they appear in the Waylay and they're talking to the manager. And the manager reveals that this is not the first time they've talked before, because John had killed Arthur in their first encounter ever, which was depicted at the beginning of the episode. So I'm counting Arthur as being killed by John after possessing him and killing Parker. So I guess Arthur did die before he was killed by the witch, but we didn't know that. But either way, he should have still died earlier. I don't care. Also noting at the wager at the very end, before everything happens with Cain, a sliver of Lilith goes into Arthur's hand, and at the end of the Capo, the manager talks to Lilith, as Arthur and John are sent to the Dark World. This is when the numbers get a little fudgy, so okay. Part 53, the Black Tower. First, Arthur kills a wheezing man who's about to bury him alive. Oh no. He wakes up and he's like in this coffin and he's naked and there's just the lighter. But before they get the lighter, before they turn it on, he is incredibly angry that this man is trying to bury him alive. So he takes the shovel of the man and kills him. And then he turns on the lighter and he's like, oh, what happened? Oh no. They're in the Dark World. When I say the number gets fudgy, it's because I'm trying my best to honor what is being told to us, what is being shown, what is being read out in the transcripts, knowing that it is just a sliver of the actual horror that we are experiencing, right? I can count dozens of bodies, 24, hanged in the Black Tower. John says they are hung from the ceiling as the stairwell continues to turn upwards, a winding circular staircase, and dozens of bodies are hung from the rafters all the way up. There is no other descriptors about the bodies beyond just dozens, and because it's dozens specifically, it's not just 12, it's 24. I cannot go higher than 24, because then it'd be 3 dozens, that's more, 4 dozens, ugh. But because he just says dozens, I'm going to say 24. As they continue up the stairs, there is a body that Arthur pushes that can also count.
Push one of the... yes, there, push that body aside.
So that is a pushed body that I can count, separate than the dozens, because I want to. That is just hanged in the Black Tower. And also, they're all they, them. There's no specific gender for any of them that are hanged in the Black Tower. So that's just all neutral gender. This less fun. At the top of the tower, they see a mountain. And John describes thousands of carcasses. I am not counting thousands of carcasses, please. Mainly, okay, so this is used for horror, and it's unknown if the carcasses are human or monster. He just says carcasses, right? And then it's all in the distance. Can't even tell what gender they are. They would all be neutral, and that's not fun to say, to just count thousands. No, I can't do that. So I'm going to count at least two to compensate for that. Atop the mountains are thousands of carcasses with large standing wooden stakes driven through them like scarecrows. Normally for like mass casualties, like I said, I only count like one for like groups, like in Carcosa or like Bones or something like that. But because it says thousands, I'm gonna count two just to honor that. Just know that's thousands of bodies that I'm not adding to the count. That would not be fun. And then Arthur and John are descending down the tower, and they use a rope made of hair to climb down most of the way. And at the end of it is a scalped head. I feel like that's enough to count this as like a kill of this unknown gender scalped head used as a rope to climb down the Black Tower. It's not addressed that John can't see their death, but I think because it's like, you know, they're in the dark world and stuff, I can like excuse that, you know what I mean? As they're climbing down, they're also attacked by these centipedes that I'm just, you know, calling them the Black Tower centipedes. One of them is killed by Arthur. One of them attacks him. He like throws it down on the ground. And then he later, once they get off the tower, John sees the body of the centipede that he threw. So he killed that one by just tossing it off. In their descent, they did drop the lighter, which they need. So they try to find the lighter, and the lighter was picked up by this man. And so they find this also naked man with the lighter, just sort of like in the forest, like playing with it. And that man gets killed by the rat catcher. So I'm going to count him. And then Arthur and John join a chase scene of the rat catcher chasing after the thin, naked men that scurry around like rats. So John mentions the rat catcher attacking some of them, but there's no specifics of swings or attacks or anything like that. So I'm just going to count one thin naked man being killed, which represents the chase victims of the rat catcher. The chase sequence ends and Arthur hides inside a den and finds himself trapped with another naked man. And eventually the rat catcher appears and kills that den trapped naked man. And then that den trapped naked rat man has a monster rat scurry out of its body, and that monster rat is also killed by the rat catcher. The rat catcher is just some guy that Arthur briefly speaks to. He's like, "You're not a rat, so I'm not going to kill you. Bye." Arthur is hearing like a bell in the distance, and so the rat catcher's like, "You should follow the bell. I don't hear a bell," and they go follow the bell. And Arthur and John find themselves in no man's land, and underneath them are the faces of the fallen. Same issue with the carcasses. John says the death masks of 1,000 dead. So that's two masks, two faces of the fallen that I'm counting. They cross through no man's land. They pass through the lantern monsters. They can't kill that. I would have been cool, but I get why not. But there is a mention that something is inside the lanterns. I don't know what it's trying to say. I cannot count anything there. And then, you know, they go into a war zone, and that's when they encounter Friedrich. He does mention killing some people there as well, but no specifics. All in the past, no body seen, cannot count anybody there. But we did see Friedrich in the Dark World, so this is why I counted him in a prior video. Part 54, The Living Wake. We are still in the Dark World. We're traversing this blighted land that Arthur puts on a mask for, like, what's it called? A gas mask that was given to him by Friedrich. In this blighted land, they pass by this farm, like a field of a farm, and the farm itself is like representative of an actual farm, but it's not an actual farm. It's just a fake or a depiction of it. It's weird. It's off. It's wrong. In this blighted farm's field, there are severed cow heads. John says this field is barren, save about a dozen severed cow heads, each of them sporting large black crooked horns, the bodies of which are nowhere to be found. He does mention some of them are still alive. I'm still going to count 12 severed cow heads here because, you know, you don't survive without your head being severed. You know what I mean? In the blighted land, they also discover like the floor is covered in like some weird black webbing, and underneath that are skulls. So I'm going to count one skull underneath the blighted webbing to represent all of the skulls that they see. They also see skeletal remains plastered on the barn wall. John says, in fact, a few skeletal remains are plastered against the wall of the barn, I assume by the blighted webbing, that I'm also going to count one skeletal remain for. They also see this creature that is sort of eating the skulls. It sort of like rolls around and it uses its trunk to give a skull to like its pack, and something in the pack takes the skull and eats it. And so I'm going to count the skull being consumed by the skull-eating creature, and then it just like poops out dust, skull dust. Arthur and John eventually leave the blighted area. They find themselves in like this funeral-esque location, and they see a coffin with the name John Doe on it. And they have this really nice moment where John gives his own eulogy, reflecting on everything that he has learned and how he's changed and stuff like that. It's really long. It's kind of, it's not boring, but it's definitely long. And then they open up the coffin and there's just a body in there. So I'm going to say this is not John Doe, same thing as not Edward William Allen, not Sasha, not John Doe, found inside a coffin. I think it is he, him as well, so that's a male. They pass through a dangerous forest. They find the cliff made of coffins. There's no bodies in those coffins that they see. Cannot count anybody there. And then they see a huge upside-down isopod floating in the sky over an ocean that John vaguely remembers. And they climb up the stairs and find themselves in that isopod that is actually Yorick. That's Yorick's actual real-life body. And he has a plan to get Arthur and John back to the living world, but they need to find a body for Arthur and a body for John. John has a body already there. Hastur. Not counting Hastur, they mentioned the body of Hastur is there. But it is, so in the middle of season 3, something happens where John is returned back to Arthur's head and Yellow is sent into Larson's, so the body that John was in was left behind. So they find that body, they're going to take that body there, and then also say, hey, Arthur, go talk to the doll maker to find a body. But before that, they go to the Bone Citadel, where John as Hastur ruled in the Dark World. Now, the Bone Citadel is entirely composed of bones of Arthur. But because this is just so vague, I have to take it line by line and see what is described, what is detailed, and count there. So, if there are individual body parts or bones or aspects of the Citadel mentioned, I will count at least one Arthur for each. And John saying a vague amount cannot count as one, so it must be specific. John says, what is there to describe? It's a cathedral built in pain and misery, in anger and resentment and hate. Every bone. That, for me, that's just going to count as a general. Every bone, that's one Arthur. And then the next descriptions have to be specific. So that's just the vague, one every bone, one Arthur. Every chandelier, every seat crafted with agony, such immeasurable hurt that it emanates torment. And upon the royal seat at the top of the stairs before us lay my body, Hastur. John continues, I wasn't lying when I told you I hunted and killed. My time here was painful beyond belief, and I didn't hunt and kill at random. I didn't murder innocents or torture children. I only hurt one person, the same person who provided every bone. That counts as the first, every bone that I mentioned first, in the Citadel. Every skull, every rib cage, and every vertebra. You, Arthur, I killed every version of you. So that's 8 Arthurs that I can count here. Arthur died 8 times, killed by John 8 times. When we get to part 55, The Last Doll Maker, it gets even more crazy. So, when John is telling Arthur his story about him being in the dark world and building his bone citadel, we hear moments in the past. And so there are specific Arthurs that I can count depending on specific moments. John as Hastur is angry that Arthur had just stabbed himself in the neck trying to stop the King Yellow, and because of that, he's now in the dark world. And he's super angry. Cain appears. He doesn't know that he's Nyarlathotep. He just knows Cain is a little, And Cain is like, I can help you. Just tell me what you want. And he summons an Arthur. And when that Arthur appears, he says, Eric? I'm assuming that this Arthur, his version of John is named Eric. So when he sees and hears, he doesn't see because he's blind. When he hears the John Hastur, he thinks it's Eric. So he says Eric. And then he's killed by John. Cain keeps talking. He's like, I can give you more. I can give you more Arthurs. Just tell me when. And so he snaps his fingers and we, transition onto a thing. But we know that John told Cain to get him another one, and Cain just obliges. So that snapped finger is another John appearing that it will die. We don't see him die. We don't know how he died, but we know that an Arthur appeared to be killed by John with that snap. So that's another kill. We get another Arthur, a past Arthur, killed by John. Nothing interesting here. We just hear him voiced to be killed by John. I can count 2 Arthurs when John says, some of them I hunted for sport, some I toyed with. So that's some I hunted for sport. That's an Arthur hunted for sport. And then an Arthur he toyed with. That's 2. And then John says, others I pretended to save, only to crush their hopes. That's another Arthur who was with crushed hope, killed by John. And then he talks about how there was an Arthur that Cain had summoned that was a little different. He was older and he was panicked because Cain had just appeared at his home and tortured everyone around him, slaughtering his wife, his house guests, and his father-in-law Daniel. So I can count 3 of old Arthur's guests. We do see in a later episode, Cain shows Arthur a life he could have it's like during Christmas or something, and there's Arthur and Faroe, Daniel, Oscar, Noel, I believe, is also there. Marie is also there. Did I already count Daniel? Something like that. I could count Marie, Oscar, and Noel in this moment, but there's no specifics here. Things are a little fudgy. So I'm just counting his house guests at 1. And also in that past moment, there was no Bella, his wife, there either. So there might be some connection here. I'm not fully sure. For now, it's just 3 of them. Bella, oh my god, Bella died twice. His house guests, random house guests, and Daniel, leaving Faroe, an older Faroe, alive. And old Arthur is worried about Faroe because she's like 18 now, and he's like worried about her, and he's begging to John, hey, Faroe was left alone. And John is like, I don't like this. He still kills old Arthur. He doesn't like it. This does end John's rampage, and so he tells Cain he's done with killing Arthurs. So that's done with killing. I lost count. I have it counted in my notes, but I lost count mentally of how many Arthurs I've counted so far. John is done with his rampage. He tells Cain, I'm done with this rampage. Cain makes his deal to get Arthur to New York, to the Cult of the Fallen Star, to the Greystone, etc. And we are caught up to the present. After that, they head towards the last Dollmaker, finally. They encounter 3 scarecrows that I can count as killed by the Dollmaker. 1 scarecrow. In general, John sees just a bunch of scarecrows. I'm just going to count 1 of them. He doesn't specify any of them. And then later in the episode, the Dollmaker says that there are 2 scarecrows on the other side of the house. Out the back of the house, there are a few fields and 2 large scarecrows, 1 with a missing right hand. The left hand points to the hunt, as he tells them he wants the head of the butcher who's in the dark world. It's very ambiguous as to whether some of them are still alive or not. He does mention that they are still dying. Some of them are dead. Some of them are being tortured, and I don't know enough. 3 scarecrows is enough for me. Part 56, The Parting Glass, we have dual perspectives of Arthur trying to find and kill the butcher, and then the butcher, old butcher, talking to young butcher about his first kill with his father who takes him on a hunting trip. We can count Grimbard, who was killed by the young butcher. He had met Arthur and he was helping him deal with the butcher, and he pushes Arthur out of the way of a trap and he gets trapped. Arthur hides, and the older butcher cuts him down and lets the young butcher kill Grimbard so he can, get more kills under his belt or something like that. I'm not counting Reynard because Grimbard calls Arthur Reynard, so he's a little wonky with it. Nor am I counting other victims that Grimbard sort of mentions. No specifics, no individuals counted, so I can't count anybody else. Grimbard is enough for that. I don't know what happened to Reynard, so I cannot count him either. When Arthur finally gets to talk to the old butcher, we learn that this butcher is a different butcher from a different dimension, a different timeline, where in Part 40 of the Order, there's a moment where Arthur has to make a decision as to who stays behind and who goes with him to chase after Larson. In Arthur's timeline, he chose the butcher to stay behind and Noel come with him. But in Old Butcher's timeline, it was reversed, and because of that, Old Noel died, but I am not counting him in this kill count because we never met Old Noel, other Noel, that's it. We never met the other Noel, and it's a completely different thing, so I'm not counting the other Noel having died in that moment. And then Arthur kills the older butcher, which was sickening moment, really fun, that he chose to kill the butcher, even though he was his friend, but he needed him for the body that the dollmaker needs to make for Arthur. So he kills the old butcher. Really interesting moment here. I'm also not counting the prey that the butcher tells to the young butcher. I'm seeing butcher a lot. Not counting the prey because it was like a fox or something. That's just an animal. I'm not counting animals. And then Arthur and John return to the dollmaker with the butcher's head. The dollmaker has made a body for Arthur, and he is trying to transfer him over, but because of the scratch of the segment of Lilith inside Arthur's hand, she fights back, destroys half of the dollmaker's warehouse, factory, whatever, and the dollmaker is like, fuck you, destroys the body. I'm not counting this body as killed because it was never animated. It was just made. I'm not counting it as being killed. And he's probably going to keep using the body. Come on. And so at the end of the episode, Arthur decides to let John possess Hoster and possess the body and move on and defeat Cain. And so he lets himself die. So we can count Arthur again, sacrificing himself to let John continue on. In Part 57, The Fallen Seed, the past moment in Part 13, when Arthur had bitten off a piece of John's finger, that finger grew into another body of Arthur, so he is reborn inside the Dreamlands. And he is in place of John is Lilith, Scratch. So that's a really fun moment here. He is trying to navigate another different relationship. There was him and John, him and Yellow, and now him and Lilith guiding him because he's still blind. In this long episode, really good episode, only one person dies, and that is the manager's Lilith. Manager's own daughter worked together. We don't know what they wanted to do, but when Cain appeared to try to kill Nyarlathotep, manager's Lilith, tried stopping him, and Cain killed her. We can add her to the list because she is important to the story. I can totally see this being shown in a flashback as well. At the end of the episode, Arthur and Lilith reach the desert of the forest, and they encounter the heralds of the King in Yellow that take them to Part 58, the King in Yellow. The King in Yellow is back, now whole again, so that was John and Yellow into one, the King in Yellow. Larson's also there. He's naked, he's chained, and his eyes are weirdly colored. And they mentioned that his eyes that were destroyed by Cain are prisoner's eyes. So I'm counting this prisoner whose eyes were taken by Yellow, who put those eyes into Larson's face. when Larson was taken here at the end of season 4, because it was just Yellow in the Dreamlands now, and he hated Larson, so he tortured him, put the eyes in, whatever. We also learned that all the prison pit prisoners were killed by Yellow. This one count represents it in general. There were no other prisoners met in part 19, the prison. I went back and checked. I was like, do we hear any other prisoners? No. We had Michael Faust, who killed the woman. Both of them are dead now. And then Lorik escaped. No other mention of any other prisoners. So I'm just going to say the one prison pit prisoner died. As Arthur is talking to the King Yellow, he's talking about York, the King Yellow, John / Yellow / says that York died to help John go to the Dreamlands. And that is a revelation that makes us really sad, because York was a really good, really amazing character. He didn't die when Cain crushed his head. He was just sent back to the Dark World, but now he is fully dead, which is really sad. And then in the conversation with Arthur and the king says that Yellow and John both died to become the King and Yellow. That's a little dubious, because John does eventually come back. But because the king is so adamant that he is his own person now, I'm going to count John and Yellow having died here. It's a little fudgy. This is Eldritch monsters we're dealing with. And then we can count Larson, who was killed by Lilith, because they try to find another body for Lilith so that, she can be free of Arthur. And Larson kills the body of Hastur, that was from the Dark World. And in retaliation, Lilith takes over his body, and Larson is finally killed. Which, good karma, good final ending for this character, but still having him linger, because I like his accent. Everyone likes his accent. Lilith likes his accent. And now, what was it? Cain had mentioned like a ship name between Lilith and Larson. Willith? Something like that. Is around. Yay! And then at the end of the episode, they go back to Addison, and John returns back to Arthur's head, leaving Yellow as the King Yellow, so they're both back alive. Weird stuff here. I'm still going to count them as both having died before. So, part 59, the Vast Darkness. They are gearing up to confront Cain to stop him from killing Azathoth. They go back into Larson Estate, and Arthur and John have a really nice moment where they're, we're back together again. And they had found a lantern they traded it with, Arthur and Lilith had traded it with the trader. They get locked inside a bathroom, and that lantern shows Arthur and John. John sees a vision of an older Pharaoh who's like 18 years old and an older Arthur in like Arkham, and he's about to get attacked by this assailant, and Pharaoh jumps in front of Arthur and gets shot protecting him, which makes Arthur go a little insane. So there's an older version of Pharaoh who dies here. We see it. And then Cain is messing with Arthur and John after this. He's like, I know you want to get that lighter inside me, inside my pocket, sorry. And I know that Lilith is working with you. I'm going to try to mess with you. And they don't know why, but there is a moment where Antoine and Sir Roderick are back, and they're like, what's happening? And then Cain just has their head explode. So Antoine dies again. Roderick dies a second time, with their heads being exploded in front of Arthur. And then Cain sends Arthur to like a bathroom, and there's like a bathtub filling with water, and there's a Pharaoh as a child drowning again. And like, this is a vision of Cain trying to kill Arthur, I believe. And so Arthur goes into the water and tries to save Pharaoh from drowning, but he can't. But eventually that Pharaoh tells him that it's not cold enough, so he lets go and lets her drown once more. So that's another Pharaoh died in this episode. Cain brings them to like a theater, tricks them, finds the location of the waylay. Lilith attacks them, but this is also the episode where, like I said, Cain showed Arthur and John a version of what could be, his family with like Pharaoh, Oscar, Noel, Marie. This moment he tricks them by giving him a coin. The coin turns into a lighter. The lighter goes into his pocket. He thinks that that's the lighter to put into Cain's pocket. It's the other one, the wrong one. Lilith attacks him, fails to kill him. Cain leaves a waylay, leaves Arthur and John on the top of like a frozen lake in Addison. And they decide the only way to get to the waylay is to die. So they both break into the icy lake, and Arthur and John die drowning to get to the waylay. Part 60, the final act, we have Cain in the waylay. Now, we eventually learn that this is a different type of waylay. This is like a decoy waylay. So with that in mind, we can count 4 waylay patrons, one of which actually said, "Get off the stage," to Cain as he's singing. And then boos and jeers count as one other patrons. That's 2, get off the stage, boos and jeers. Another patron says, "What the hell's wrong with his face?" when, Cain shows the grin of Azathoth. And then 4th waylay patron, just to count the rest of the people killed by Cain after he goes on his rampage. I'm also going to count the waylay announcer who announced Cain. He calls him Kanye. I'm going to count him as being killed by Cain as well. We don't get any showcase of him being killed, but I assume that he is among the bodies that Cain kills. He also has killed Victonetta, who was performing as well. Like, once Arthur and John go to the waylay, they see Victonetta dead, except the rest of his band is not dead yet. And then I can count to 2 other waylay patrons killed by Cain. John describes them. I can't discern pieces. They're just piles of dripping viscera. That's 1. And then, oh God, some are stuck on the ceiling. So I'm going to say, dripping viscera on the tables, and then 1 on the ceiling. So that's 2 patrons that I can count inside the waylay that are killed by Cain. I can count another waylay patron noted by John.
Follow the carnage, I suppose. Yeah, careful. There's a body to you there. Yes.
That 1 body is enough for me to add another patron to the mass casualty event in the waylay. Later, Arthur and John find a waylay butcher and cook killed by Cain in the kitchen, so that's another 2. When they confront Cain, Cain is going crazy. He's talking about like paint and stuff, and they see that he has killed a variant of Daniel, and says he wants to use him as paint and stuff. So that's Daniel going onto the count for the 2nd time. Oh my God. And because this is a decoy waylay, I cannot count any other waylay patrons, waiters, or anything like that seen in a past moment in the waylay, whether in the capo or in part 44, what was it called? The Deliverance. Any patrons or waiters mentioned, seen, heard in those past 2 episodes cannot be counted because this is a separate waylay. And as Cain, Arthur, and John are discussing, arguing, trying to stop Cain from trying to kill Azathoth, and Cain is having daddy issues, the manager activates the obelisk and Cain leaves. And as he's leaving, he makes this waylay collapse on it and destroys it. Because of that, I can also count Tanetta's band that was left alive on the stage by Cain. It represents the entire band. I don't know how many band members there were, but that's at least 1 person killed in the band. First, Cain goes to like a beach and he wants to leave Arthur there with Faro so that Arthur can watch the end of the world with Faro. Arthur follows Cain into Arkham and sees the obelisk. Really cool obelisk. I love this design of the obelisk and like the sound design, the chanting in the back. Love that moment. And then Cain appears and he has wings made of Arthur's. However, I can only count 2 Arthurs made into wings killed by Cain, 1 each for the left wing and the right wing. And because we know at this moment that Cain has just killed every single version of Arthur, the band, everything like that, every other variant seen in Intermezzo was folded into this number or killed by John for the Citadel, so that there's no inflation, there's no overlap. Any other version I've already killed, Cain's already killed, John's already killed, etc. That way, it's a lot easier and not like going into the weeds trying to see like, okay, what Arthur has been mentioned that has not been killed. So by that measure, I can also count Darkther. Darkther killed by Cain. We saw Darkther, and there's no confirmation, but Arthur Prime is the last one. So Darkther did die at some point. And I don't want to fold them into the other kills, so I just want to say, yeah, Darkther died. Then plot happens, story ends. Yay! Arthur is able to trick Cain, distracts him as John is able to project and slip the lighter into his pocket. Lilith traps Cain, saves the day, stops him from trying to kill Azathoth, and as Arthur is falling from the sky, Lilith saves him and carries him and turns into Pharaoh as Arthur is dying because he's just bleeding out from Cain's attacks. So I'm going to count Arthur and John here, killed by Cain. And then they're back to life. They come back to life in the Waylay, and the manager's like, I'm going to give you another chance, and sends them back into a version of their world. And just to wrap it up, DC Al-Koda, no one dies here. Arthur and John are back in Arkham. Everything is fixed. There's a jawbone in a jar on their desk. There's a music box by Tom and Luna. Who are they? And then Pharaoh walks right in. And the show ends. Hell yeah. Now we get to the stats. I counted a total of 139 people/monsters killed in Malevolent Seasons 5 and 6. That is 31 in Season 5 and 108 in Season 6. With 139 deaths over 2 seasons, we get 69.5 kills per season. With 139 deaths over 23 episodes, that's the 20 main episodes, Intermezzo, The Capo, and DC Al-Koda, we get 6.04 deaths per episode. We get this gender distribution with 7 women, 57 men, 24 monsters, and 51 of unknown gender. Most all of those are in Season 6, the mass casualty episodes. Of individual body counts, these 2 seasons, Cain racked up to 29 confirmed kills, John with 17, most of those Arthur kills, Arthur with 7 kills, and Lilith with 5. Like I said before, I'll be awarding the best kill and the worst kill awards to each pair and not to each individual season. So for seasons 5 and 6, the best bookmark award of my favorite kill goes to the witch killed by John. I really, really like this manipulation that he does of convincing the witch that he is accepting his role as the King in Yellow and that he is above humanity. He will work to kill humanity, and then he tricks her into shooting herself. That was so cool. Love that. Absolutely adored that moment. And then skipped scene for my least favorite kill of these 2 seasons, I'm going to give to just the 1,000 carcasses on the mountain. I think that it's not overkill, but definitely that's a lot to say and not follow up on. And it threatened to inflate, it threatened to inflate my kill count, but I didn't let it. So, I'm giving the skip scene award for that. Now I will be talking about the entire show running totals, all right? In all 6 seasons of Malevolent, I counted 220 people/monsters killed. With 220 deaths over 6 seasons, we have an average of 36.66 repeated kills per season. And with 220 deaths over 66 episodes, we have an average of 3.33 repeated deaths per episode. The total gender distribution is 20 women, 93 men, 38 monsters, and 67 of unknown gender. Of the running total of individual body counts, the lowest person on the table is Lilith with 5 kills. The Butcher stays at 9 kills. Arthur racks up 18 total kills. John racks up 21 total kills. And Cain has a total of 40 kills. And now looking at the entire season, I have noticed obviously, that some people are killed repeatedly. So I kept track of individual repeat deaths. Multiple characters died at least 2 times, that being Daniel, Lilith, Sir Roderick Vale, the Butcher, and Bella. Pharaoh was killed 3 times throughout the entire show, and John and Antoine are tied at having died 4 times each. Arthur, I counted, at least died 24 times. That's really fun. And that was a kill count. This was so fun. Listening to Malevolent and keeping track of all the characters and who died and who killed and stuff like that was so fun. Was so frustrating, especially when I discover things. Oh, I should have counted this, I should have counted that. There was a moment where I didn't do any of the individual things in the Bone Citadel, and I was like, actually, I do have to do that because he mentions chandeliers and steps, and that's at least 1 Arthur died. So I had to recount a lot of it, but it was a lot of fun going through the entire show and just talking about how many people have died. And also knowing that this is just a sliver of the actual body count, because visually, we would have seen a lot more Arthur's dead. We would have seen a lot more unknown bodies. And so this was just a lot of fun, really frustrating, but in a very stimulating way. And I had a lot of fun with it. Thank you so much if you got this far. I'm so sorry this one video was much longer than seasons 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But, you know, this was a great season 6 specifically for the amount of deaths counted. I'm finally done talking about Malevolent Blackstone on this channel. However, Malevolent Threshold is still coming out, going to continue coming out, so I will keep talking about that as it goes, hopefully. But for now, this is it for Malevolent Blackstone. Finally glad, finally happy to finish. Great show, great characters, great horror, but I am looking forward to talking about other horror, to talking about other stuff. Magnus Archives, Magnus Protocol. I'm working on High Nigh, and I will be also listening to the Silverses and the Sheridan tapes as well. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, share with your friends. Let me know what you think. Don't forget to be passionate, and I'll see you later.